It's kind of ironic. Today, I'm well known as the driver who pulled Niki Lauda out of his burning Ferrari at the Nürburgring in 1976.
Lauda was trapped in a ball of flame.
That's certainly not what I wanted to be known for. In fact, when it happened, I shrugged my shoulders. I was kind of ticked off because I didn't get a chance to finish the race, but I walked away and continued on with my craft. Things happen and you do what you have to do. I would have been much happier if I had been remembered and known as a guy who won a world championship. But today, when people say Brett Lunger, Formula One racer, that tends to be what they remember. It's, again, not what I wanted to be known for, but life happens sometimes. My early childhood and young years were pretty typical. Went to school. I was very fortunate. I managed to get into a very good university. I went to Princeton University. But at the end of my third year, I left. And a lot of people were scratching their heads, including my parents. They weren't too happy. I joined the Marine Corps instead. Now, if you think about it, 1967, 66, 67 was not a particularly good time to join the Marine Corps. And yet, for me, it was important. I grew up, thanks to my father, with a sense of service. I felt that service to country was important. Perhaps that's not as important today for many people, but in my day and age, that was very important. Joining the Marine Corps was something that I had probably been pointed to for a long time. Often in life, you don't realize what you have until you're maybe 2 steps beyond it. Looking back, I certainly was blessed to have the parents and the family experience that I did have. A normal upbringing in many respects, but certainly sheltered and protective. Joining the Marine Corps obviously shattered that sense of protection. Here I was one day at Princeton University, then I get on a bus at 4 o'clock in the morning, go down to Paris Island, get off the bus, and there's a drill instructor shredding me, absolutely shredding me. And that was kind of a wake-up call. I suddenly realized that all the comforts and protection and privilege that I had growing up meant nothing in the Marine Corps. Then I went through the enlisted commissioning program, earned my bars, and went over to Vietnam as a second lieutenant. But I'll tell you what, that 1 year I had, or close to a year that I had as an enlisted man, was invaluable. Because as an officer, I had that year of experience on the other side of the table, understanding how the enlisted man lived, understanding how his world functioned. But the transition into civilian life was, in some respects, very difficult, in some respects, not difficult for me. In my last year of service, I knew what I wanted to do. I had certain goals that I had established for myself, and I used that period, my last year of service in the Marine Corps, to prepare myself for my new career upon leaving the Marine Corps. That career was automobile racing. My first year in motor racing was phenomenal. You got to understand, I was coming out of nowhere. I had some very good guidance from some people that were successful in motor racing. My first season in motor racing was the 1971 season. I competed in the Formula 5000 series sponsored by Liggett and Myers. It was a very exciting series. They had some very good race car drivers, some Europeans, a couple of guys from Australia. There were only 8 races. And during that season, I won a race. I finished 3rd in the championship. And that was, number one, a surprise to many people, and number two, a good platform from which to develop the rest of my career. The Formula One circuit is pretty phenomenal. At the time, I didn't realize how special it was. It was not until I retired that I suddenly stepped back and realized, wow, did I actually do that? Because while I was driving at that level, I didn't see anything on either side of me. I focused on the task of going fast and winning races. That was all I could look at. I couldn't look at the party scene. I couldn't look at the circus that surrounded Formula One. I had to focus on my craft, and that's all I did. The competition was intense. There were a couple of races where they would only start 26 cars. The top 26 cars were covered by just over 2 seconds on the grid. That means if you miss a tick, you're out of the show. It was very intense competition, and yet I thrived on that. That became almost addictive, being able to challenge myself like that and to have to perform at that level. The incident at the Nürburgring in 1976 was pretty typical of the unsafe conditions that we were dealing with in motor racing at the time. I didn't know that as a driver. Again, as a driver, I didn't look around me and say, well, this track's safe, this track isn't safe. I got in the car and tried to do my job as well as I could. But the Nürburgring was particularly difficult. It's a long circuit in those days. It was a very long circuit, 14.2 miles to the lap. You can imagine the challenge of having safety crews around a track of that distance. Very difficult to do. The day that we raced was partly rainy, partly dry, and that's a challenge for a driver. Do you start on wet tires? Wet tires allow you better grip under rain conditions. Do you start on dry tires, which give you no grip at all if it's wet, but will be much faster when the track is drying out? Most of us started on wet weather tires. At the end of the first lap, the track was drying out, and a lot of the leading teams went in to change onto dry weather tires. I stayed out on the wets, and I continued on the second lap. Niki Lauda in his Ferrari had pitted behind me, or had pitted and came out behind me, out of the pits behind me, but he was on dry tires.
Niki decided to change the tires from wet to dry very soon, one of the first. That strategically was a...
Faster, the track was drying, my tires weren't holding up. We went down through this set of switchbacks, a fast downhill section, across the Adenauer Bridge. After the Adenauer Bridge, you have this very fast left-hand turn. On a dry track, you commit to that turn totally.
What happened next has entered Grand Prix history.
You're flat out, foot flat on the floor, sliding through the turn, fourth or fifth gear, and then down the road. With my tires, again, I was flat out. I committed the car to the turn, and just as I did so, I saw the debris going up in the air. Niki Lauda had gone through the turn ahead of me and had crashed on the exit. My car was committed to the turn. I had no way of controlling my direction after that. I went around the turn, slid down. I was able to slow the car a little bit, but I T-boned into Niki's car, which was burning across the track as I arrived. It was already on fire. The impact actually set off my fire extinguisher, which helped dampen the flames. I got out with the help of a couple other drivers that came on the scene after me. We were able to get Niki out. One of the real heroes in this was Art Mazzario, an Italian driver who at one point in time had driven for Ferrari. He knew their seatbelt configuration, which I did not know. It was different. When I first tried to get the belts undone, I couldn't do it. Art stepped in, undid the belts. I stood on top of the car and pulled Niki out. But again, it was one of those things, nothing went through my mind. It wasn't something that I made a cognitive choice to do this. When my car impacted his, my race was basically over. And you react. You don't think, you react. But that's training and preparation. That's being able to handle situations under stress. That's probably what allowed me to do that. But again, it's not what I wanted to be known for. I would have much rather have missed Niki Lauda, won the race, won the World Championship, but that didn't happen. My transition away from motor racing was not an easy transition. Frankly, I didn't understand the importance of what I was doing before I left. I didn't understand how much of a part of me that had become. So when I left motor racing, I had to reinvent myself. Well, quite surprising to me, I developed a love for aviation.
This is Meridian 816 Bravo Charlie instruments to India.
It happened one year while I was still in motor racing. We had just finished a race at Watkins Glen in upstate New York, and a friend of mine had this pretty basic airplane, Cessna 172 or something of that nature. And he said, Brett, let me fly you back to Delaware from upstate New York. Okay, I'll do that. I'll never forget, we took off, we flew over the thruway, and I looked down, and here we were, 5,000 or 6,000 feet above the freeway, going home with no delays. I thought that's pretty cool. One of the things that I encountered in aviation actually pointed me towards the service part of my life, which is now pretty much who I am. In my second or third year of flying, we went through one of the airports, one of the local regional airports, and on the counter in the office where you pay for your fuel was this brochure that promoted what's called the Angel Flight Network.
And tonight's Wider Horizons WHYY's Bill Wilmore has that story. Bill? Stephanie, a Wilmington man with experience as a Marine and professional automobile racer has now earned himself a new title. He's Delaware's Pilot of the Year for Angel Flight Mid-Atlantic, serving as an angel for sick patients in need of a special pair of wings.
Baltimore, then fly down to Concord, North Carolina.
Well, we started getting involved with the Angel Flights, and they were really incredible. The Angel Flight Network provides free transportation for patients who are going through life-threatening therapies or medical treatments in hospitals. Quite often these patients don't have the money or the means to travel from their remote location to, say, to Boston for the Children's Hospital there. Utah has a number of hospitals, Cincinnati. So the Angel Flight Network is set up to provide this free transportation for the kids, usually children or sometimes adults, to take them to their treatments and sometimes to take them home afterwards. I also fly for the Veterans Airlift Command, which as a former Marine Corps officer had a lot of appeal to me. As the name implies, the Veterans Airlift Command is for wounded veterans, mostly getting them to and from Bethesda Naval Hospital or other places for treatment or for reunions, things of that nature. And here's my point. I'm blessed with the resources, the time, and the skill to be a pilot, to fly a really nice airplane. But that in and of itself is serving only me. If I can bring this to benefit other people, it's extremely rewarding for me, and it allows me to give back. If you look at your life and you have things that went well for you, that's a blessing, but it's also an obligation. You have an obligation to give back to people who maybe didn't catch the same ride that you got. It's an opportunity to give back. And that kind of is how I got into my responsibility workbooks. For many years, I'd been aware of the fact that I was not the only one on the planet making bad choices. A lot of other people maybe stumbled when they were young, made bad choices, ended up paying a severe price as a consequence for their actions. And here I've developed these workbooks that allow me to help people understand the importance of making responsible choices, especially today. It's probably more critical today than ever. So what I've had to try and do is find people who have had successful programs, people who are already up and running, people who have demonstrated their credibility and their efficiency in this field, and I've tried to introduce the workbooks to them. The Ridge Project is a good example. My path to the Ridge Project and to the TYRO program was pretty much by luck and circumstance. I was an exhibitor at one of the conferences that were addressing these needs, and someone from the Ridge Foundation was there also, took a look at the workbooks and was interested in it. I think Ron and Kathy were also speaking at that time, but as rock star speakers, they were in and out the door, and I really didn't get a chance to talk to them. But once Ron and Kathy and I developed a relationship, Ron said, you know, take a look at this TYRO program. You ought to take a close look at it. And he talked me into coming down and actually going through the 2-day course that they hold here in McClure. And I'll tell you what, I was blown away. I really didn't appreciate how powerful that program was. The thing that really appealed to me was that many of the underlying principles behind TYRO are the very same principles that I'm trying to put forth through my responsibility workbooks. It was just overwhelming to be a part of that, to go through that process, to be able to understand and to see where TYRO fits in with my mission. It was gold. It was absolute gold. Going through the TYRO program was an interesting process for me. I'd never been that intimately involved with this transition that is so critical from incarceration back into the regular community. TYRO focuses on that. There's also a common thread in fatherhood. With TYRO, that is front and center for everything that is being taught and being encouraged. But I think TYRO can be an absolutely indispensable tool.
Das ist der amerikanische Privatfahrer Brett Langer mit einem McLaren.